So today here at CEBRI we have Jim Brooke, a journalist. He lives in Moscow. He's been in Russia for a few years now, and he's here today to talk to us about Russian politics and international relations. And the first question I would like to ask you, Jim, is about power relations in Russia. So we hear a lot about Putin and his personal project regarding Russia and the future of Russia. But I would like to know a bit more how is the power dynamics in Moscow, what is his base, and how's the opposition, if there is any opposition?
Yeah, good question, Renata. I think Putin actually remains fairly popular, maybe an approval rating about 60% in Russia, quite stable. His power base is what I would call the TV tribe. The people get their information from state-controlled television. People rely on the government, on the state for their salaries and their pensions. These are teachers and people who really depend on the federal government for their livelihood. People work for state companies. There are 701 company towns in Russia. These are cities that depend on one state, often state enterprise, and they're very dependent on Moscow buying their products and sending them contracts. Obviously, I think the military support him. Older people, rural people. The people who don't support Putin tend to be younger, better traveled, better educated, working in the private sector. The people who are what they call the creative classes, urban people. There's Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Novosibirsk are these three cities. And then there's a group of 10 cities which are called the Milyonniki, population 1 million. The urban middle class generally is skeptical or opposed to Putin, not enthusiastic. They were enthusiastic in the 2000s when he stabilized the country and provided jobs, but basically he was riding the oil prices, which went up very nicely, and so he presided over an economic miracle, which really was helped by the Chinese economic explosion and the demand for resources and the price of oil, gas, and natural resources going up.
For some time, Medvedev was the president in Russia, and some people see some differences between both Putin and Medvedev.
Yeah, I think Dmitry Medvedev, who's now the prime minister, he was a bit of a puppet for Putin. I think Putin was tired of being president and wanted to kind of kick back and pull back and be less in charge. And he sort of let Putin do it. And Putin, Medvedev is a very, by Russian standards, liberal, open-minded, sort of internet-savvy person. And he took a more liberal line. I remember him saying that I'd like, when people think of Russia, they think of a smile. He was a very smiling, nice guy. And very internet-savvy, and much of a more modern man. He's about half a generation younger than Putin. Putin is very much the Soviet generation, a man who made his career in the Soviet Union and then was traumatized by the collapse. Now, the opposition are often people who are the post-Soviet generation, who really don't know. They weren't formed in the Soviet Union, they didn't go to college in the Soviet Union, didn't work, their careers had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. They're much more open-minded, they're well-traveled, they've been to the West. 20% of Russian adults will probably leave the country and come back. They go back and forth. So they're very westernized, very plugged in to the outside world. Half the population is now on the internet. So we're creating a new post-Soviet generation. Putin undoubtedly will hang on for at least the end of his term, which is another 5 years, and maybe for another total of 10 more years. But the generational wheel turns, and the new post-Soviet generation will eventually take over.
So now a question about recent events. We have Snowden in Moscow. How do you think this story will end? And do you think there might be further consequence for Russian-American relations?
Well, I think Putin wanted to have it both ways. He wanted to have, with Snowden in Moscow meant that Moscow was once again on the center stage. And everyone said, what's happening in Moscow? What's happening in Snowden? What's happening in Moscow? And the Russians love that. The Kremlin loves that. They love to be in the center, back like the old Cold War days, the polarity. So they loved that part. Obviously the FSB, which is the new KGB, loved having Snowden there because undoubtedly they went through his computers and copied everything. That was a huge, just kind of handed, delivered them on a silver platter, you know. I mean, you know, what a great, they didn't have to get someone inside the NSA. They got it all delivered to some guy who shows up from Hong Kong. Great for them. So that was a plus for the Russians. Now, the Obama administration sees him as a fugitive from justice and want him back. They see that Putin is being two-faced, and they're quite unhappy about this. And the American, not just Republicans, but also Republicans and Democrats. I think with the NSA issue, it's much easier to personify it and to demonize Snowden and to focus on Snowden. It's easier to do that, call him a traitor or whatever, than to focus on the much larger, murkier, fuzzier, complicated issue is debate the balancing security and privacy. You know, how much security, how much privacy, you know. If, and I'm talking now to you on July 22nd, if Snowden stays in Russia, I would not be surprised if Obama does not visit Russia for this two-day Moscow summit, September 4 and 5. And I think there are a lot of negotiations going on behind closed doors. This is not going over well in the United States. They just see it as another poke in the eye by Putin. The earlier one being 6 months ago when Putin banned Americans from adopting Russian children, Russian orphans, saying that Americans are bad parents. You say that Americans are bad parents, well, you're criticizing a class of about 60 million people. It's not smart. I mean, it's very, that cut through
but
all...
But it plays well for the domestic audience.
But it cuts through all the fuzz of, and a lot of Americans feel insulted by that, you know. It's as if, and so,
Yes.
I think Putin, because in the Soviet system, there was a divorce between public opinion and foreign policy. So you could attack Americans and then sort of compartmentalize, and then the president would come and you do your deal. Well, the president does not have, let's say the U.S. Congress is increasingly fed up with Russia, and they're not sympathetic because they feel they've been insulted and provoked, and they're not going to walk any extra mile for Russia. They don't care. They really are not going to be very helpful. And so there's a wonderful New Yorker cartoon where the great white hunter is facing the rhinoceros, it's charging, and he reaches back for his gun, and the African guy's taken off, you know. Well, there's no reservoir goodwill, no backup for Russia. And it's too bad because it's become an anti-Russian thing, but it's really an anti-Putin, anti-Kremlin thing, where people in the United States are really hostile to Putin and his way of provoking and picking fights at the U.S. and they just don't want to deal with him. But that, of course, you know, things get blurry and people become Russophobic instead of Putinophobic. I think what will happen is that the relationship will be downgraded and Obama will not go back to Russia again in his presidency and send little people over to deal with things. And if it doesn't work, doesn't work. And you know, people in Washington have low expectations of the Putin administration. And, you know, if there's something we need, we'll try to make a deal. If we don't make a deal, we're not going to cry about it, but it's just not going to be a top priority. If you're president of the United States, you want to achieve things. You don't want to go to meetings for the sake of meetings. You don't want to have someone waste your time. You know, I mean, you know, he gets up in the morning and what do I do with my next 1,000 days as president? Do I waste it with the Russians who aren't going to give me a deal? Or do I work on the Palestinians? Or do I work on the North Koreans? Or do I work on the Syrians? You know, whatever.
So here in Brazil and also in other vehicles of Western press, we hear a lot about Pussy Riot, the girl band, and also they were arrested, and also about gay people or gay advocates being arrested. And just a curiosity, is this like a big debate inside Russia, or these things are marginal?
Well, I think in the cities, in this, the internet tribe debates this. The educated urban dwellers debate this. Putin took an option to go with the very conservative elements of society, the church, the rural, people who watch television who really aren't terribly well informed about the outside world. And he decided to pick on Pussy Riot and put them in jail for 2 years because this strengthened his support with the church and with some churchgoers. Inside the church, not everyone is supportive of this kind of very hardline approach. Some people say it's not very Christian to put a young mother in jail for 2 years for, voicing her opinion. On the gay thing, that's kind of an easy target to kick on the gays because there's a fairly strong amount of homophobia, and the tragedy is that when you pass a law banning gay propaganda, it means you can't have an intelligent discussion on television about gay issues and gay life and gay choices and who is gay and why are people gay. So you're kind of condemning society to go down this closed-minded, reactionary road, and Russia is taking a very unique path in this, where you have gay marriage here in Brazil, in most of the United States, and in Europe, and then Russia is becoming almost like a fortress, a reactionary fortress, where they say, let's go back to 1965, and very intolerant, and there's a culture clash because they're the Russians who've been to Europe and are exposed and worldly and are more open-minded, and then they're kind of prisoners of this very conservative government. It's very similar to Argentina and the military in the 1970s and 80s, early 80s, or Franco in Spain, where there's a sort of very conservative, paternalistic, patriarchal figure kind of imposing a very conservative worldview. It's as if, there's this group in São Paulo called the TFP, Tradição, Família e Pátria. It's as if the TFP was running Brazil, which would be a very different Brazil.
Oh, no, thank you.
Wouldn't that be fun? Well, I'm going to church.
Thank you, Jim.